Welcome to Office 2013 class video number 38. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, and this workbook is for videos 35 to 39, click on the link below the video or go to our class website. Hey, we're still studying Excel. This is Excel Basics 20, and we got to talk about cell references. Now, so far in the class, we've been doing relative and absolute, but we're going to learn about mixed cell references. This is the true power when it comes to cell references in Excel. And it's the dividing line between are you going to be really good in Excel or just average. Now, mixed. Why is it called mixed? Because when we do a cell reference that's mixed, it's going to be half relative and half absolute. Now, let's just do a first example and remind ourselves about relative and absolute. So we have sales rep, sales, and each cell in this column for earned commissions needs to be multiplied commission rate times sales. Absolute cell reference times relative. So I'm going to click in cell C6 equals one cell to my left. I use my left arrow times F6. F6 needs to be locked, so we hit the F4 key. Now notice, what does the F4 key do? It puts in 2, 1, 2. And the reason why is every cell reference has a column reference and a row reference. All right, I'm going to Control Enter, double click and send this down. I'm going to Control down arrow and F2. Hey, that's perfect. One cell to my left. I got Abdullah's total sales times the commission rate in F6. Control Enter, Control up arrow. Now we want to go click in C6 and hit the F2 key. Now, what happened when we hit F4? It put in $2. Notice column F, row 6. It put in $2. That means if we were to copy this formula not just down, but also over to the side, both F and 6 will be locked. So we're going to do two things in this example here. We're going to learn something new about the F4 key, and then we're going to see that we actually do not need one of these dollar signs here because we're only copying in one direction. All right, so F4. We know that if our cursor's touching the cell reference, either at the end, in front, or in the middle, the F4 key will work. If it's on the other side of the multiplication symbol, then if we hit F4, it affects that cell reference. So boom, touch F6, and now watch this. F4. What? There's only one dollar sign. That means only the row 6 is locked absolute. The F now is relative. F4 again. Oh, so the F4 key is toggling through the different types of cell references. Here, only the F is locked. Absolute. The row 6 is relative. Hit F4 again. Oh, we're back to totally relative. Hit F4 again. Back to absolute. So now watch this. I'm just going to hit the F4 key. The F4 key is really the merry-go-round key to toggle through the 4 different types of cell references. Absolute, mixed with only the row locked, not the column. Mixed, only the column locked, but not the row. Relative. So which dollar sign do we need here? We obviously don't need both because we're not copying it across the columns and down across the rows. Well, let's do an experiment and see. F4 until you get relative, both of them. Notice B6, F6. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Now let's go to the second cell and hit F2. Wait a second. What is it that changed there? The F6 turned to F7. Here, the B6 turned to B7, which is exactly what we wanted. So if you want to stop the 7 from moving, you go up to the top cell, F2, and I'm going to hit the F4 key. 1, 2, stop there. Now, most of the times when we're copying, we just hit F4 and lock them both. But we want to learn in this first example that it's not always the case that we need both. We're only copying this formula down across the rows. So the only thing we need to stop from moving is the 6. Notice as we copy it down this whole column, the relative position of the column, meaning F, is not changing. Let's see if this works. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Control down arrow, F2. That is amazing. So in this example, we're just getting our first look at how the F4 key works and what the dollar signs really mean. Control Enter, up arrow. We want to go and look at our next example and see a situation where we have to know about mixed cell references. So I'm going to go over to sheet CR3. Clicked on CR3, and here we have revenue for each month. And then we have different expenses we need to calculate for each month. Down here in our assumption table, we have our different expenses and the percentages. Now, the second video in our class, we saw a small version of this projected net income statement where we had revenues and one expense. But here we have multiple expenses with multiple percentages. So we need to create a formula. And in essence, this whole green sea of cells are going to get formulas that calculate expenses. For each expense 1, what do we need? I need 5,000 times 20%, 6,000 times 20%, 7,500 times 20%. When I copy down here, I need 5,000 times 15, 5,000 times 14, 5,000 times 5%. Now, before we look at mixed cell references, let's look at how most people would solve this. Even our textbook that we use for this class suggests that you make formulas this way. Well, guess what? The 5,000, I'm going to use the whole 5,000 in this column, so I'm going to hit F4 times, and now I click on the 20%. But now, notice as I copy this down, I want this to move as a relative. When I get down to expense 2 right here, I want the dancing ants to move to the 15%. So Control Enter, and I'm going to just click and drag. I'm not going to double click. Click in the last cell, F2. Well, that would work. But notice we then have to come over to our February column, get our February revenue, F4 times, relative cell reference. Control Enter, drag it down, click on the last one, F2. So it's working, right? But this would mean for a full 12 months, we would have to do 12 formulas. I don't really want to have to do that. And that's where knowing mixed cell references is real power. So let's start this over, delete. And now we want to do what's called the sledgehammer method. I'm going to just do the very first formula, January times expense 1. And we Control Enter. And now, sledgehammer method, I'm going to copy it down 1. And look at what changed and what didn't change. F2. OK, so here, B3, I really wanted it locked on B2. But the B13 moved, right? So what is it that changed? The B2 changed to B3. So if I didn't want the 2 to change to the 3, that means I need to go back up here and put a $sign in front of the 2. So I'm going to hit the F4 key once and twice. Now let's see if this works. Remember, this is the sledgehammer method. We're not really thinking about what's going on with columns and rows. I didn't want that 2 to change. So the way you stop it is to put a $sign in front of it. Control Enter and copy it down. Now I'm going to click in this cell in F2. Oh, look at that. It worked. B2 times B13. So I bet you if we copied it down the whole column, clicked in the last cell and hit F2. OK, so for this column, that worked. Now let's F2, B2 to B12. All right, let's copy it over this direction. Got a 0. That doesn't look good, but no problem. When your formula doesn't give you the right answer, F2. Oh, well, look at that one. The blue one is right. C2, that's exactly what we wanted. And notice for that B2, oh, the blue one's pointing to January. So, of course, when I copy the formula over, I want B to turn to C. And that's exactly what happened. But what about this cell reference? That's not at all what I want. That rangefinder, that color rainbow, is telling me, hey, that's not what we want. But let's think about this. What changed? I actually really wanted it on B12. So the B changed to C. Right? There's a B12. Here's a C12. So if I want to stop the B from moving to a C, I have to go back over to this formula and put a $sign in front of the thing that was changing, which is the letter, the B. So I'm going to hit F4 1, 2, 3 times. So there we have lock B, but not the 12. Control Enter. Now I'm going to copy it down. Click in cell B7, F2. Oh, that one's working. It's got the January revenue. And for expense 5, it's got the 33%. Escape. Now let's try it this way. Just one over. Click in cell C3, F2. Oh, look at that. It's got the right February revenue. And for expense 1, it's got the right expense. Now let's try this one all the way across the column to E column. Click on the last one in F2. Wow, look at that. It's got April revenue, and it's got expense 1. Now we need to try the whole table. And I'm actually going to delete all of these and only start with the formula in B3. Now, to copy it through to the whole table, meaning we want to copy it down and over. If you use your Angry Rabbit and your fill handle, you cannot copy in one clean swoop. So I'm going to choose to go down, then let go. Then re-grab the fill handle with the Angry Rabbit, and I'm going to copy all of these formulas at once. Click and drag. Now watch this. Go to the furthest one away, diagonally furthest one away, and hit the F2 key. And admire what you did here. April times 33%. That is absolutely amazing. That means for this particular budget, instead of creating 4 separate formulas, we were allowed to create one, copy it down and over. If it was for 12 months, that means we would create our formulas 12 times faster. That is the power of mixed cell references. Now, before we go to our next mixed cell reference example, we want to finish this projected net income statement. Escape, and I'm going to click in cell B8. We need to calculate total expenses, so Alt equals our keyboard for auto sum. Be careful. It's trying to be polite and guess, but it got it wrong. We do not want revenues in our total expense calculation. So I'm going to point to the corner and click and drag. These are relative cell references, so Control Enter and copy it over with our fill handle and Angry Rabbit. Click in the last cell, F2. Perfect. Now net income, revenue minus expenses, both relative cell references, equals 7 cells above minus 1 cell above. Control Enter, copy it over. Click in the last cell, F2. Perfect. All right, so we saw our first example of mixed cell references for a budget. Now, this is usually a hard topic for people to learn, so there's a great practice problem. I'm going to click on CR2, multiplication table. And what's so nice about this is our formula inputs are going to actually be at the left and top of our table. Now, notice, for any intersecting cell, a multiplication table would take the column header 10 times the row header 9. Here, look to the front of the row 6 times the column header 3. Now this isn't a business example, but this is a great practice problem for you to practice. And I know when I was first learning mixed cell references, occasionally I'd be doing a budget or something, and I'd be like, I don't remember how to do that mixed cell references. And I quickly come put 1 to 12 and see if I could remember how to do it with this multiplication table problem. All right, so just like with our projected net income statement, our goal is to put one formula and then copy it down and over and have it work in all the cells. That means instead of creating 144 separate formulas, we create one, copy it down and over. All right, so we're going to create our base formula. In this case, hey, let's get column header times row header. Now it doesn't matter. You could have done the row header and the column header first, because of course multiplication can be done in any order. Now, last example we did the sledgehammer method. In this example, we're going to see a different method. It involves always asking 2 questions of each cell reference. Now we have 2 cell references, so we're going to have to figure out what to do with both of them. Is the cell reference going to be relative? Is it going to be absolute? Is it going to be mixed with just the row reference locked, or mixed with just the column reference locked? So I'm going to start with B2. This is the 2 question method. All right, ready? The questions you always ask are, when I copy it down across the rows, what do I want? Do I want this cell reference B2 locked, or do I want it relative? Right? So when B2 gets down to here, should it be looking 1 above, or should it still be locked on the number 1 at the top of the column? It should still be locked. So here's the question. You say, well, if I'm copying the formula down across the rows and I want it locked, that means I go to the number. Notice I was copying down across these numbers, so I go to the number and I put a $sign. I'm going to hit F4, F4. That's the first question about B2. Now, when I copy the formula across the columns, what do I want B2 to do? When I'm all the way over here, do I want 1 times 1? Or when I'm here, do I want 4 times 1? I want the 4. So as I copy the formula to the side across the letters, the columns, I do not want B locked. So I'm not going to put a $sign in front of the B. All right, so we asked the 2 questions there. Now let's go ask the 2 questions of A3. When I copy the formula down across the numbers, do I want A3 locked on the number 1, or do I want it to move relatively? So when I'm down here, I'm not looking at 1, I'm looking at 6. I want relative. So A3, as I copy down, needs to move to A4, A5, A6. So I'm definitely not putting any $sign in front of that 3. That was the first question. Now, the next question is, what do I want to do when I'm copying across the columns? So this A3, now I'm going to copy it across the letters. Do I want it locked on the row header, or do I want it to move relatively 1 cell to my left? So when I'm over here, do I want 5 times 1 to my left, or do I want 5 times 1? Yeah, that A3 needs to be locked as I copy it across the columns. So I'm looking at the cell reference, and I'm saying, OK, I'm moving this direction across the letters. Since I want it locked across the letters, I put the $sign in front of the letter. I'm going to hit F4 1, 2, 3 times to put the $sign in front of the letter. And there you go. We've asked 2 questions of each cell reference. Now we can Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. Remember, it's a 2-step process. So now that I've copied it one direction, I can point to my fill handle with my angry rabbit and click and drag. I'm going to click diagonally furthest one away, F2. That is absolutely amazing. 12 times 12. Now I want to show you Escape Control Z, Z. I want to show you that you can also copy it across, let go, and then double-click and send it down. That will work also. Yet another method, and I'm going to clear this whole table. If you know that your formula is going into a whole rectangular range, you can actually highlight the entire range before you start creating your formula in the active cell. Now, before we even look at our formula, this works for anything. If you wanted to put the number 1 into all the cells, the light colored cell is called the active cell. Whatever you type here, a number, if you use Control Enter, it tells Excel to put the thing in edit mode in the active cell into all of the cells. So ready? Control Enter. I'm going to hit delete. I think love is the most important thing in the universe, so I love to do this. Type love, this is a word, Control Enter, and it's like I'm putting love everywhere. Delete. So you can put a number or text. You can also do it with a formula. So in the active cell, equals column header times row header. All right. So B2, as I copy it down, I definitely want it locked. I'm copying it across the numbers. So I'm going to put the $ in front of the number, F4, F4. B2, as I copy it across the columns to the side, I definitely do not want it locked. When I'm over here, I want it looking at the column header. So I do not put a $ in front of that B. Now I click my cursor into the second cell reference. When I copy this down, do I want it locked on the number 1 or do I want it to move relatively? I want it to move relatively. Now the second question of A3, as I copy it across the columns, do I want it locked on this number 1 or do I want it to move relatively? Well, of course, when I'm over here, I need 5 times row header. So because I'm copying it across the letters and I want it locked, that tells me I want the $ in front of the letter F4, F4, F4 3 times. Now I have my formula. To populate whatever's in the active cell and edit mode, I hold Control and Enter. If I go diagonally to the furthest one away and hit F2, that is beautiful. All right, we have one last example for this video, and the next video we'll have a few more mixed cell reference examples. I'm going to go to CR4. Now, in this example here, we're going to do a bit of finance, but this class really isn't about finance, but we want to see here that there are some business or finance or accounting examples where you actually have variables or formula inputs as column headers. This whole column needs 6%. This whole column needs 5%. And also row headers. So this whole row is going to need 20 years. This whole row is going to need 25 years. And our goal here is, what will your pension be worth when you retire? Now, we don't really know what percentages we're going to have or how many years we're going to save for. So building a table like this gives us lots of potential answers. Now, if you put $3,000 into some retirement investment vehicle each year, we want to know, for example, in 20 years, if I earn 5% on average, what will my pension be worth? This calculation is called a future value calculation. In a finance class, we learn all the beautiful finance behind this. But we're just going to look at this in terms of cell references. Every single cell is going to need the percentage that we're hopefully going to earn, the number of years we're leaving the money in, and the amount we're putting in each year. Every single cell gets a column header, a row header, and this $3,000. So think of this as 3 different cell references in your formula. Now, luckily, the future value calculation, the formula for it is amazing. And actually, a couple videos ago, we saw a similar finance example with a PMT function. But here, we're just going to use FV for future value. It's asking for the period rate or the interest rate. So I'm going to click there, comma. The NPER, that's the total number of periods or total years. The PMT, that's the amount that we're putting into the investment vehicle each period, in our case a year. Now, for finances, we saw a couple videos ago, we know these functions know cash flow. When you deposit money into the bank, or investment vehicle each year, even though it's yours, it's coming out of your wallet, so you have to put it as a minus. And I'm going to click on that cell. These square brackets here indicate that these arguments are not necessary. The function will work without them. So we're going to leave them out and close parentheses. So here we are. We have a formula. I do not want to create 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate formulas. I want to create just one formula, copy it down and over. I want to create one formula so I can go 5 times faster. No problem. If we know mixed cell references, we can do it. So I'm going to click in B4. The two questions are, hey, 3%, when I copy it down through this whole column, does the whole column need 3%? You betcha. That's what this column is. Now, I'm copying the formula down across the numbers, and I want B4 locked. So numbers locked. That means I put the $ in front of the 4. So I'm going to hit F4 key twice. Now that same cell reference, we have to ask the second question. When I copy it to the side across the columns, do I want it locked on 3%? Or when I copy it over, do I need it to move to 4 and then to 5? I need it to move, so no $ in front of the column reference B. All right, so the next cell reference. Remember, each cell reference in your formula, you have to ask those two questions. As I copy it down across the rows, do I want it locked on the 10-year? Or when I get down to this cell, do I want to look at 25 years? Yeah, so this has to be a relative cell reference as I copy down across the rows, so no $ in front of that 5. Now, the second question about A5, when I copy it across the columns, does this 6% calculation in cell E5 here, should it be looking at the 10 years? Absolutely. So that means that A5, when we copy it to the side, across the columns, the letters, it needs to be locked. So that tells me I'm copying across the columns and I want it locked. $ goes in front of the letter. So I'm going to hit F4 1, 2, 3 times. I asked the two questions about A5, so I'm done with that one. Now what about B1? When I copy it down, does every single cell need 3,000? You betcha. How about when I copy to the side, does every single cell need 3,000? You betcha. So this is example where we hit F4. So mixed cell reference with just the row locked. Mixed cell reference with just the column locked. Absolute cell reference locked in all directions. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. 2 steps when you're copying down and over. Re-grab your fill handle with your Angry Rabbit and click and drag. Click in the last cell diagonally furthest away from the active cell that you just created the formula in and hit F2. And admire your handiwork. That's absolutely amazing. 8%, it got it exactly right. 50 years, it got it exactly right. And it's still looking at that 3,000. That's the power of mixed cell references. All right, in our next video, we're going to see a few more important cell reference examples and talk about assumption tables. All right, see you next video.